Hello, I'm David Hunt. My guest today is Jacci Pillar. Now, listen to some of this stuff. An interesting child with ASD. As a teenager, the Nazis come into play. You're asking why? Because of the sound of music. We're going to get to that as well. One of the first female RAAF got the bends, moved to Alice Springs, then Darwin, then China, ended up in Melbourne. Comedian and a model on billboards all over town, at tram stops. You know, you can't move without seeing her image at present. Jacci, hello and welcome.
Thank you, welcome. Thank you so much for having me. That was the best introduction I've ever had. That was marvellous.
Well, there's so much to talk about. Let's get started. You as a kid.
Described as difficult, but difficult in it's sort of quite passive ways. You know, I was terrified of everything basically, and I still am. I still have problems with escalators and crowded rooms and things like that. So yeah, I was the kid that cleaned out the supermarket by screaming, and I used to do something on stage where I used to say, and my father was smart enough to rent me out to clear so you could have a quiet shopping experience. I didn't like crowded rooms or spaces and tended to withdraw, but was a chatterbox at the same time. So yep. It seems like a contradiction, but I was hyperlexic. It means you can write a poem by the time other people are still asking for their sippy cup. It means you can, you might have a large vocabulary, and I also chatter and would chatter incessantly when I was stressed, yep. Which was a lot. Now I've learned to channel the chatter a bit better, I hope.
But then that's all part of growing up, isn't it? You know, like, like you don't know really who you are as a kid. When did you realise that there was something a little bit different to the other kids? Probably
the end of primary school into high school, because that hyperlexia I then took, and I used to take in a lot of films and read a lot and read content that other people didn't read and weren't interested in, and didn't make me a lot of friends in the schoolyard because I would talk about topics that, you know, and I don't engage in small talk well. That's a struggle for me. So it was like I would be talking about serial killers or whatever else, and yeah, I was the weird, so sort of about 10, 11, 12. Yeah. But also, I mean, I have a couple of sensory conditions that mean I actually experience the world quite differently. So I tended to be the kid that wanted to I would sort of feel forced to chatter and talk to kids, and then I would extract myself and be the quiet nerd. But
what about parents? When did they come into play to think, hold on, there's something wrong here? Because it's only really like something that's happening now, isn't it, where the awareness level is. So, you know, like, did you go and see people about it, or? My
mum was fairly convinced there was something wrong. Mm. I have a lot of memories of being carted off to different doctors for different opinions, and no one really coming up with anything. And at one point it was dyslexic, but then they went, how can you be dyslexic and have a vocab like you have? And no one could quite work it out. And my father was chronically ill from the time I was born. He was 20 years older than my mum. So a lot of the focus was on Dad. Yep. And Dad and I had a bit of a club together. So Dad recognised me, I think, and there's been some speculation about my father. Obviously we can't go back in time and diagnose. That would be inappropriate. Yeah, he didn't like crowds. He had similar fears, and he and I used to say things like, these people, we'd sit together and go, these people. And I say now, you know, other people are the humans, you know, and that's where that came from, those conversations with Dad.
And did you get on well with both your mum and Dad?
Mum and I have always had a really complex relationship. I'm just going to say that, which meant we've never really gotten on terribly well. We've tried very hard. Hi, Mum. And Dad and I were very close. And I mean, I was, from when I was 10 days old, I was with Dad. Right. Basically, my mum was really struggling. He'd had a massive heart attack when I was about 8 or 9 days old. Wow. And in the 70s, that was a big deal because you didn't get diagnosed until it was really terribly life-threatening. Yeah, and the medication wouldn't have been there, so yeah. Okay, let's move forward to your teenage years, and the Nazis come to play here through the sound of music. I became a bit fascinated with the sound of music, and totally.
Yeah.
Like I think I played it 180 times and blew up the VHS player, which my father was incredibly proud of, that we were one of the first households in the street to have a VHS player, and I completely almost trashed it by playing the sound of music. And I was fascinated by the idea that people could do this to one another, and everything in all the theme through all my career as an anthropologist, as a human being, is the fascination with why we hurt each other. Why do we do this? And then the whole idea of someone saying, well, you're this particular racial grouping, or you're this, and then them looking the same was like, wow. And I don't condone any kind of racism or prejudice. Yeah, when everyone else was in the schoolyard and I'd say, something about the sound of music, of course, it didn't make me a lot of friends. And everyone thought it was because of the music and the costumes, and now it was like, the hills are alive with the sound of gunfire. What the hell? I was completely fascinated by it.
Yeah, well, and it is, and an interesting way to look at it as well, through a movie. But it had a strong message as well. That was the thing with The Sound of Music.
Tearing up the swastika.
It wasn't as simple as a lot of other musicals were in the day. It really had a good story behind it. You finished school. What happened then?
I think I bailed out in year 10, bailed out in year 11, and then just could not see myself getting to the end of year 12, because between year 10 and year 12 was shit hell. And I just went, I can't do this. And my father said to me, I think you should join the military. I did that. And I went, okay, Dad. And I tried to get into the Air Force at 15 as an apprentice, because I had always been fixing cars with Dad, and I think I learned to weld when I was like, before most people could do most things.
I still can't weld.
I'm not very good at it, but I can do it. Yeah, so I was really interested in doing something technical.
Okay.
Because I think that's what Dad and I had done. And I got bullied a lot in high school for that. I was like the only girl in a lot of the classes. I did metalwork, woodwork, tech drawing. So I applied at 15 and was told I had failed the psychological testing, or the aptitude testing as they called it then.
Yep.
And then I reapplied at 17 and worked in Coles in between, and then got in at 17. Was rejected as a technician. You sort of get these test results back, and they don't tell you why, but they say you didn't make it. And they offered me clerk supply.
Which is?
Warehousing administration,
okay,
but around aircraft parts. And for me, and I fortunately was posted to 486 Squadron in Richmond, which was an operational Hercules transport aircraft. So it was a squadron, which was quite exciting. And people recognised me. I think I had a nickname of Phone Number Girl at one point, because I remembered every phone number.
Oh, really?
If you wanted to say, I need to ring so-and-so section, I'd go, extension 492. It was pretty quickly recognised that I was good with large loads of data, which I am. And I ended up managing the cross-reference registers, which were before we had databases, big books for every aircraft with every major part in them.
Are they still around? Do they still exist? Are they stored somewhere? Do you know?
They'd be on databases now.
Yeah, I know, but what about the books? Would they be around?
I'd love to know. I'd love to see my cross-reference registers.
But you just think that, wouldn't it be nice if something like that is still around?
Yeah, they were great records. And it was through that experience that I got the attention of the commanding officer, because one day he was standing looking out at the flight line, and there was an aircraft that was struggling to take off, and it was about 2 a.m. And I get this phone call to come over to see this commanding officer standing there. And status doesn't faze me. I just talk to everyone. I don't, you can be the Queen of Sheba.
I am.
Oh, great. Fabulous. So most people go, oh, you've been asked to speak to the CEO. And I was a little dot of a Marilyn Monroe impersonator then. And here's this tall man standing there, and he says to me, I believe you can tell me what's going on with this aircraft, because I knew where all the components were being moved around and what the activity was on the aircraft. And I remember I looked out the window and I said, well, sir, it's a piece of shit, sir. And he paused and he looked at me, and I act this out on stage sometimes because the body language was really intense. And he said, I think I like you. Because I was the only person that had said, and then he said, can you clarify that? And I explained that it had had so much movement of major components that, in my view, it needed a major service. And they did, and it was
fine.
Fine.
Yeah.
I was sort of put in front of him by a flight lieutenant who'd noticed that I had this sort of head for the systems of things which other people didn't have, and saw patterns that other people didn't see. So he then said, why did you join the Air Force? And I said, well, I really want to be a technician. And then he's championed me becoming a technician. And I think I was the first, he called it pseudo-techo, on the squadron, which was a Clark Supply doing duty crew, you know, waving the aircraft in.
Oh, okay, yep.
And then I went and did my training at Wagga. Wagga Wagga?
Wagga Wagga.
Exciting place. I think it nearly 18 months, 12 months to, I can't remember. And
did you enjoy that experience?
I enjoyed the training.
Yep.
I did enjoy the other side of it when I eventually got to a squadron, to
Why?
Sexism and discrimination,
okay.
largely.
It doesn't surprise me. That's
Yeah,
why
I mean, this was the 80s.
Of course, of course.
We didn't even have a toilet.
Yep.
So we had a senior non-commissioned officers single cubicle, and then all the men's toilets. So they gave us that, and then we had to flip it over, and it had on the back of the sign, senior non-commissioned officers, and you turned it over, and women underneath it. And we basically had to book in because it was, do you think you know when you're going to pee?
Relationships? Did you get into any relationships in that world?
So much like I absorbed the sound of music, and that became my understanding of propaganda, which I then carried through my anthropology degree, or began my unpacking human behaviour, that I didn't understand the humans. I found myself going, well, I'm not really attracted to this, what we now know, we have the language for now, heteronormativity, but I'll try really hard. And I did, and that resulted in a lot of unhealthy, abusive relationships, heterosexual ones until in my 40s.
Right, okay.
And a couple of really on the side relationships with other people assigned female at birth, who I knew this is where I was more comfortable.
Right.
But as an autistic person, there's this pressure to fit in, and then you're doing it as an act of survival as well. And then as you age, or particularly my generation, younger autistic people today now have a much more strong sense of who they are. Mm-hmm. It's like you were saying before, we didn't know as much in the 70s.
Yep.
So yeah, that was quite destructive for me.
And did you marry
Yes,
along the way there?
Yep. I did. And then extracted myself through study and ending up in Alice Springs, running away.
Right. So you left the RAF?
I left the RAF after about 5 years, I think.
Right.
And that was largely because when you got married then, there was a pressure on couples who were, technically it was still what was called fraternization if you married someone
within the
services.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of a habit of people worrying they would get posted apart.
Okay.
So I left because I knew that I had other ambitions as well, and I wanted to become a professional scuba diver at that point.
Let's talk about that. Where did you train for that?
In a place called Noosa,
Right.
on the Sunshine Coast, is where I grew up. My family moved there from when I was 4.
Why did you want to be a scuba diver?
Did some diving at 16. It was the first time I felt at peace, was under the water.
Yep. They say that, yeah. My only fear is the Jaws theme music is playing in the background.
And that's where my life's interesting, because when people were fearful of sharks, I'd quote stats like 26 people in 2014 died falling off a chair.
Yep.
Are you strapped in?
I am.
Good.
I am.
Seatbelts on. So my analytical brain, it steers me away from that, and then I was fascinated by sharks. Again, they're predators, so I'm interested.
Yeah. So you start your training.
Yep.
And were you loving it?
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I was working for someone, and we didn't have a lot of understanding either in the 80s, and I was working for someone who we had to do a short course, and I was a dive master trainee. I'd got to almost dive master. And we had a short course of people that needed to go back to Sydney, and we pushed on through. I think we did 4 dives on a Saturday in really, really rough conditions.
Right.
And I went home feeling unwell, and then I was flown, that was the Saturday night, and I think I was flown the Sunday night to Townsville Hyperbaric Chamber.
Wow. So I've learnt something here, because most people don't know very much about the bends. I always thought you got it when you were underwater.
I would, don't quote me, the knowledge may have changed by now, but it can happen from, there's the movie stereotype of coming up out of the water bent, to 30 to 24 hours afterwards.
Okay.
And one of the dangers in the 80s was where people were staying on tropical islands and, you know,
Whoa.
and diving again. The danger is, so
Yeah.
I may have been bent technically in the morning, and then I did 2 dives in the afternoon as well, so that
Yep.
would have made it worse.
Okay.
Because on paper it looked fine.
Did you know when it actually happened? Did you feel it? Or?
I was exhausted and I had pain in both legs,
Right.
but I don't have great knees. And, you know, I was 22 and bulletproof. You think you're pretty bulletproof then. And I think I just rationalised it away. And then when I got home, I actually drove home in my wetsuit because my parents were still living in Noosa and we were posted to Amberley. And my then husband was posted to Amberley. And so we used to stay there so I could dive on weekends.
Yep.
And I drove home in my wetsuit, and my mother to this day says I knew something was terribly wrong. She never came home in a wetsuit.
Yeah. What's the feeling like? Because again, it's not something that the viewers would know anything about, like I don't know anything about.
There's 3 different types, and I had 2 types.
Right.
So-
oh, you weren't happy with one?
No, no, look, I don't, go big or go home. You know, someone will correct me if I say this wrong, but basically musculoskeletal version.
Right.
And
Sounds good to me.
yeah, basically soft tissue.
Yep.
And neurological, which meant I was at risk of an aneurysm because the bubbles were very small, and it's nitrogen, it's not oxygen.
Yep, that's right. I
Body
did
is
know
not
that.
able
Yep.
to release
Right.
the nitrogen when you're exposed to decompression illness. I had started to develop double vision. I was aching, my joints, particularly both knees, both hips and my wrists, and then sort of creeping into my shoulders was aching. It was
Wow.
hard to breathe.
Yep.
And then over time, the joint pain, particularly in my knees, because the bubbles settle in your joints, and that's why they call it the bends. The pain starts to get more intense.
Yep.
And the way I have described it over the years is imagine if someone picked up a round ball peen hammer and chipped away at the inside of your knees and just kept doing it.
Whoa.
It's intense.
And do you still feel it to this day? Or
I still have a sort of an achy, painy thing, and I've read a little bit about this. Haven't read in the last 10 years because you tend to go, okay, that's that chapter of my life.
Sure.
And I believe there's a number of us that still experience sort of like an arthritic ache.
Right. Okay.
And I do experience a sort of a baseline pain.
How long did it take to sort of get over it?
6 years.
6 years. Wow. That's a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Yep. Okay, you mentioned again about your husband, that you were living on the Gold Coast with him.
Well, I have Sunshine Coast. Oh no, well,
Sunshine
Ipswich,
Coast.
and
Yeah.
between Ipswich in Queensland and the Sunshine Coast.
Right.
Yeah.
So how long did that relationship last for?
It was 12 years in the
Right,
end.
okay.
Yeah, I tried really hard.
Yeah,
Tried really
and-
hard to be straight.
Right, okay. And so what happened? Did you then realise, hold on, I think that there's something, I shouldn't be in a relationship like this, a male.
Yeah,
female
totally.
Yep.
I mean, I didn't vocalise it much because I come from a family where it's very much mum, dad and the kids, and
Yep.
no one in my immediate family would have said, I don't know. I don't know what would have happened if I'd come out in that. You know, everyone did the whole, I have nothing against gay people, but, you know, we know that, but I think there would have been some throwing of hands in the air and some problems. I had told my husband that I thought I was bisexual, but in the last 3 years of the marriage, I studied anthropology. As the marriage disintegrated, I said, I want to pursue my career. And that's when I got offered a job in Alice Springs after doing an honours degree.
Right, doing what?
Sacred sites management.
Sacred sites, wow.
Still to this day, if I was to not wake up tomorrow, I would feel that my life was worth something for that experience.
Yeah, it would have been an amazing experience.
And I think it grounded me in truth. It grounds you in, you know, you suddenly just go, I'm living this white post-colonial set of myths that, you know, I'm not being really who I am, you know, and putting your feet in the sand in the Todd River in Mbantua in Alice Springs at the bequest of a traditional owner to settle myself, to ground myself. Being a cynical, analytical, logical, autistic person, it sort of opened my mind to other possibilities.
Yep. What were the next possibilities that you took on?
I got out of sacred sites management because at that time my family situation was such that it was too hard to go out bush is the terminology for it, for long periods. And I ended up working in women's shelters and youth centres and working on homelessness projects and basically working with the vulnerable for a long time and all of the challenges that presents.
Were you still married at this stage?
No, I think I got to Alice Springs and 10 days later said I want a divorce.
Right, okay.
And that was fine.
Yep. So here you are doing so much good in the community. It can be sort of soul-destroying as well at times, can't it?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard when my particular neurodivergence, my particular way I'm wired, you know, autism is another operating system, and that's how we like to talk about it now. I mean, I have massive, what is called effective empathy, which means we're empaths, we're sponges, we absorb the feelings around us, and low cognitive empathy, which means I can't necessarily work that out without an analytical understanding of human behaviour.
And unfortunately, that's hard, isn't it?
It's hard when you're working with people that are in crisis, and you know, with what we've, you know, as a nation, we've politically done to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people historically. You know, and I was raised by a father who taught me what was then in the 70s and 80s alternative politics. Now we talk about it much more openly and freely. So it was hard because, you know, we're talking about my fascination with serial killers and sociopaths and you know, or as we call them, antisocial personalities, all part of the quilt of humanity. And they have high cognitive empathy and low affective empathy. That's a generalisation, but in the main. And so that was what I was fascinated with, the opposite to me, I suppose.
When you go through little dramas that you would have been going through on a daily basis in that world, you often have to laugh to get through. And I could see that you would probably do it that way, not laughing at the person.
With.
Yep.
With.
And so is that where you got a feeling that maybe
I was funny?
Yeah.
I didn't think I was funny, but I just sort of had a really direct, matter-of-fact way of talking about things, and I don't have a filter sometimes. And when you're working in the field in Central Australia, so people appreciated that I didn't have a filter. And I remember somebody saying to me, talking about something, and I just said, "You'll need to explain it to me because I'm just a dumb white chick." And being really, and people appreciated that. You know, they went, yeah, they just sort of put people at ease. And people would laugh, of course.
Of course, a smile on their face.
A smile on their face. You know, and sometimes when things got heavy, I would, not flippantly, but sort of weave in a bit of humour into it. And the thing is about bush humour, bush people, communities that live in the bush, tends to be a lot more real in sort of people that are not minding their P's and Q's so much. So, do
you think people are like that in the cities these days?
You know, most of my life, a good slab of my life has been in very small communities. So I'm not much of an expert on this. My current feeling is yes and no. I've seen it, you know, from moving to Melbourne. Living in China was a bit different. So
why?
Living in China was, I think the city I was living in, there was about 140 native English speakers.
Wow.
And we all gathered in Starbucks.
Right.
You want to find another white person? Go to Starbucks.
So why China? How did you end up there?
My obsession with people like Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Hitler. My dad was also really interested in China.
Okay.
He, you know, had a great interest in the culture of China and used to watch everything, and we used to watch documentaries together. And then I wanted to finish writing a book, which I currently got sitting with publishers, which I've been writing a very long time, about 4 generations of invader women in Central Australia and grappling with the frontier and with racism in their own family and their desire to change that in some members of the family, with an autistic lead character. And I really wanted to finish that book, so I decided to extract myself from the pressures of Australia.
Okay, and you went there to write? And
I went there to write, and I taught English 3 days a week and wrote the rest.
Yeah. How long were you there for?
Around 6 months.
Right, fantastic. It would have been a great experience.
It was a really, really nice experience, and I learned a lot, and it happened to be located above some really interesting Cultural Revolution sites. It was it's in Guizhou province, so above Nepal roughly, a bit further that way. So it was a high ethnicity area as well.
coming to Melbourne? Why?
I was born here, and my family, the founding family from Ireland, owned the Kilmore Brewery and the pub for a period. And my family moved away when I was 4, and I think I did Melbourne Fringe in 2018 with a show named Labelled, which was about growing up undiagnosed in the 70s. And I did it at Hares and Hyenas, and I remember sitting on the edge of the stage and going, this is my people. I belong here.
Yeah.
And my dad was born in Fitzroy, not far from Hares and Hyenas.
Okay.
And it was just sort of this feeling of my own personal history that I had sort of been removed from coming back, and a sense of feeling at home.
Yep.
And I went, I think I'll stay, which has been chaotic but good for that.
I was standing at a tram stop over the last couple of days, and I looked across to the advertising on the other side, and it flipped up, and there you were in your
my underwear, in my undies, and it's
I
like
was shocked.
It's like not. It was like pointy red hair and pointy red crotch. Yeah, because I've got red underwear on.
What the?
Been a big believer in body positivity for a long time, because I've had my own experiences of not liking my body, and I think Erin Kyan and I had a conversation once out in the foyer with Gavin, and it was like, Gavin, we needed the camera on this, talking about my complex relationship with my breasts and my identity as a human being, just having a lot of self-loathing for my body, and then sometime in my 40s going and just feeling really comfortable with my body and just going, well, I don't see a bad or a good body anymore. I see a body. The organisation that I'm modelling for have an ethical, sustainable range of products that are menstruation and incontinence underwear largely, and they do it for men and women, all genders. And it was a call out for body positivity, and that's their whole brand. And I went, I'd like to do this. And then here we are.
Wow.
On a tram stop in the back of a bus.
And what do you think when you see your image there? Have you seen it yet?
People have sent me pictures. I still haven't seen it myself. As someone that's spoken up for mental health advocacy and for a lot of taboo subjects through my whole life, it's nice being on the back of the bus instead of being thrown under one.
Oh, yeah, boom, boom.
Conceptually, it's nice.
You do a bit of stand-up?
Yeah.
Which is, and is it your story when you do your stand-up comedy?
Combination. It's a combination of, the first show I did labelled was about until I was about 12. I remember when I launched it in Darwin, I remember there was a crowd of psychologists and people from the National Disability Insurance Scheme in the crowd, and them coming up at the end of me and going, you're autistic, and I hadn't named autism then on stage. And I went, oh, yeah. And they went, we got a lot from that, because I was talking about the issues of disability and society and gender and things in a story woven together called Labelled. And also talking about the difficulties of how we talk about young people. So there was a message as well, and the message at the end was, be careful how you talk to young people, because it can take years for them to recover from those messages. Yeah, I've sort of fell into comedy from Darwin down to here, and that does sort of feed into that. I don't care what, you can't get up on stage and do what I do and be worried about what people think.
But taking your clothes off and having it on the back of a bus is another matter altogether.
It was quite confronting, yes.
Now, tell us, who's your mate on the floor next to you?
This is Pepper.
Hello, Pepper, which I love Pepper. Yeah,
Pepper was a decision made a couple of years ago that I wanted an assistance dog to help me deal with largely living in a city. I have a whole lot of sensory phenomena I experience, include synesthesia, which means I see sound. And you see those videos of people that have this, that see musical notes in clear singular colours, and that's how they're musical.
Yeah.
Mine's not. Mine's like partly like a Monet splashed, and it's like someone's dipped a paintbrush in watercolour the first time and not done it well, and then sort of, sometimes
but that's
people have...
still pretty amazing to be able to, see that and feel that.
Yeah, and it's quite randomised.
And also scary as all hell.
When you're a child particularly,
yeah.
It's quite randomised. I remember in my 20s trying to tell an optometrist and and I think they were writing out must see a psychiatrist, you know, to send me off, you know.
The van's waiting out the front for you.
Yeah, it's, you know, and so part of coming to live in a city and then suddenly in a job where my first job here, which I really enjoyed, I had to travel into Bourke Street. And that was like, oh wow, this was like suddenly a realisation of what I experienced. I also have something called hyperacusis and tinnitus. You might know what tinnitus or tinnitus as it gets pronounced.
I have it.
Yep, yeah. So I have that and hyperacusis, which means my hearing's not better, but I have no filters, so I hear everything. I hear the fluorescence humming, I hear, you know, so I have to meditate it out, or I use music input quashes output.
Yeah.
But in the city, it was like, you know, I realised why I'd been living in remote areas, that I was probably gravitating there naturally.
But, and also the fact is that Melbourne is now this big international city with a big population.
Yeah.
Just getting, and you know, like you're not big in crowds. How do you cope with that?
Pepper helps a lot now.
Of course.
And we're at the stage of she's still a trainee, but to get to trainee status, she still has the same legal rights as a guide dog, as a trainee, because trainee guide dogs do too.
Yep.
The only thing we can't do together at the moment is fly together.
Right.
She can't be in an operating theatre or in a commercial kitchen, and we can't fly together with her in the cabin with me. But she's got a few more, one test to go. But she's amazing. She's a rescue. I feel like we've rescued each other.
Yeah.
She stops me, and we were at Flinders Street Station when I met with you recently, and it was about our second time at Flinders Street Station. I find Flinders Street, I'm still frightened of escalators. So, you know, it was good. We can use the lift now. I've got a genuine, don't feel like forced to use an escalator. And she stops and she makes me pause, and she'll make me take another direction. She'll nudge me.
Wow.
She'll hug my leg and lean into me when I'm stressed.
She can
senses,
feel. Yep.
Yeah, she senses me before I do.
Fantastic.
I was in a meeting, I was in a therapy session with a psychologist recently, and she realised she wasn't getting through to me and I was getting upset, so she went and humbugged the psychologist. And then we decided to go and sit in the garden, and it calmed me down. I still experience what is known in the autism world as a meltdown. I had some extreme stress in November, December, and experienced one I hadn't had, and they can become self-harming. She herded me out of a small room and kept me aware and kept bringing me down. Yeah. Senses changes in my blood pressure. I have a blood pressure disorder as well. And it's an interesting relationship because it's really rather chilled out at the moment.
Totally comfortable, happy in the environment, and she knows that you're feeling safe.
Yeah. She came from the racing world, but she was a breeder. But I still laugh because look at her, and her racing name was Fearsome Idol. Yeah, she's so chilled. And she just helps me chill. Yeah,
which is fantastic. Jacci, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today, and you've got so many strong ideas, and I reckon the next couple of years are going to be awesome for you, and I can't wait to do another interview with you in a couple of years when you're maybe on Broadway or somewhere.
Thank you very much. Look out, musical comedy.
Yeah. Jacci Pillar, thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you very much.
I'm David Hunt, and we'll see you again real soon.